All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Adam Plakta. I'm our head of customer success at Pando. And today's topic, or this session's topic, is the state of DEI and why inclusion is the future of work. We have a really great panel here. We have Yasmeen, Mertcan, Lena, and Lia here to talk about DEI. But just to set the stage, most of the participants here, I think, are in the United States. As you've seen over the last handful of months, probably realistically a little bit longer, there have been a lot of changes to the state of DEI. The DEI programs are effectively under attack. And so the way that we approach DEI programs, change management internally at companies, at organizations that we work at, or even more broadly in our personal lives, has to change and has to become more focused. And that's a big part of the conversation today. And I think when we were prepping for this call, when we were having a discussion ahead of time, one of the things that really came up is a lot of the tools that and strategies that we're going to talk about today apply whether DEI is being attacked or not, or DEI programs are under attack or not. So hopefully this sort of current state, at least in the US, ends soon, but even still, this will be an ongoing conversation as long as humans are humans. And so any of these conversations or any of these tools and tactics that we discuss today, I'm sure will be, impactful and applicable unfortunately, forever. Or better or worse, forever. So, for the panelists, first question is sort of an icebreaker, and the question without further ado is, how have recent changes around DEI changed internal positioning when discussing some of these topics? And Yasmeen, I'd love to start with you with that question.
Thanks, Adam. So, Adam, I'm based in London, UK. So I'm going to give a little bit of a flavor of what's happening here across the pond. So there have been a lot of decisions around DEI in the US, and they have impacted us without saying anything more. A lot of global organizations have cut back their DEI initiatives. There are some organizations that are repositioning their DEI initiatives. So there has been an impact of which we have felt in the UK. More than that, we have had a landmark Supreme Court ruling recently, and as fresh as 16th of April. And this ruling has defined sex strictly as biological sex under UK's Equality Act. Now, UK's Equality Act is the cornerstone of DEI in the UK. And what it has meant is that there have been significant implications on the rights of transgender individuals and their access to single-sex spaces. It's resulted in a lot of debates around inclusivity. There are questions around marginalization of transgender people. So a lot has happened in the last 10, 12 days, besides everything that's been happening since earlier this year. How it's impacting the positioning of DEI is, firstly, since from earlier this year, we have started seeing organizations go back to the why of DEI. Why is DEI important? And they're going back to the crux. And that's really helped, because when we see all of these initiatives and we see all of these programs, sometimes we forget, why are we really doing this? There is a business value for it. It could be customer centricity, it could be customer service, it could be getting great talent on board, innovation. There's also an ethical value to it. But we at times forget to talk about it, or we stop talking about it. And those conversations are now coming back into the forefront. That's also helping organizations frame DEI in this political environment as such, and get go to the people to say, well, what's the real purpose of DEI? Why did we start doing this, and why should we continue doing this? So that's the first thing that we are seeing in the UK. The second is, since the Supreme Court ruling, we have seen organizations go out and support individuals. So whether it's people, transgender people, or it is the LGBTQ plus community, we've seen that support has increased, and organizations are making space for with safe spaces where people can come and talk about how they're feeling. They're giving access to mental health support, because there are two communities which have been deeply impacted by this ruling, and particularly transgender people who are now feeling unsafe, and who are really not sure what's going to happen in the future. So that's a little bit of flavor of what's happening in the UK right now and how it is affecting the positioning of DEI in organizations.
Lena, I'm curious your perspective as well, being in Canada, and sort of being similarly affected by policy decisions coming out of the U.S.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch. And similarly to Yasmeen, like the US is historically been our largest trade partner. And so a lot of things are connected to what is happening and the influence that the US is having on Canadian politics. Many of you might not know, but we just had an election last night and a new prime minister was elected. And a lot of the topics that were brought up that really divided the country were, do we see Canada as wanting to join the US as the 51st state? And that was really what won the Liberal Party their place, is that Canadians see themselves as distinctive and unique from the US, but we do have a lot of influence. We're a very large geographic country. We spread out quite wide. And so thinking about the various ways this shows up from East Coast to West Coast, all based on the influence of the US, we can see that not everyone, a lot of companies were sort of put on pause, waiting for who will be the next prime minister, because what policies the government comes out with inherently affect business, right? We have rules around gathering data for employees with any company that does business with the government. They're required to gather data on women, people of racial minorities, they call it in the census, those types of things. If we had a different government, that might change. So all of the companies that are sort of required to report might have been holding their breath, waiting to see who was coming in. So there's definitely a large influence, but Canadians still see themselves as distinct and unique from the US.
Mhm. And yes, good, great. Leah, you wanna jump in and give sort of the U.S. company perspective?
Sure. I mean, not that I am, a perfect representation of all of the United States or all of the US companies, but being here in the US, I'm based in Seattle. We've seen a lot of change. And I'll say being on the West Coast, a lot of the time, I'm frankly insulated from a lot of that, but I have friends all over the country. I'm in a fully remote company that has employees in 33 different states. So I have to be aware of what's going on at all times and how shifting not just federal laws, but state laws can affect how we operate, how we make decisions, how we run policies, how we might change our processes, our internal language. There's been a lot of shifts in DEI, as everyone's mentioned already, or across the world, definitely within the US as well. In terms of how it changes internal positioning, I'll say my perspective personally is I really believe that this is a time for companies and leaders to continue standing behind the policies and goals that they set several years ago, because frankly, that part hasn't changed. It's still important to make sure that we're bringing in diverse perspectives. It's still important to make sure that underrepresented or minority groups are still being served and addressed, and that we are making sure that everyone is included, everyone has a space, everyone belongs. I know there's a lot of discussion about, okay, well, if DEI is too, polarizing a term, use a different term, but really the methodology and the processes and the goals, those should stay the same. I think there's been a lot of discussion about how, oh, DEI is, unfairness, or it's increasing the visibility of certain groups. And I think people are kind of getting confused about that in some way. So frankly, DEI, being diversity, equity, and inclusion, is really it's about merit. It's not about, let's make sure that we give people who don't deserve things they don't deserve. It's about, let's make sure people who don't have access to those same things get that same access. So I think that's kind of how I'm seeing those changes in the internal positioning.
Mertcan, you want to round us out before we dive in?
Let me very quickly. I mean, I'm in Berlin, I'm in Europe, and things are changing. And I hear a lot of like, oh, DNI is not in the programs anymore. I think we need to come to a realization that this is not something that we can take it out or take it in. Like diversity, equity, and inclusion exist regardless of if you have it or not. Either you're in a diverse organization or you're not a diverse organization. Either you're inclusive or you're not inclusive. Either you're equitable or you're not equitable. Even if you take out these teams or programs, it's just like a state of how you are as an organization. They're still measurable, they are very still tangible, and it is not something that you can just one day wake up and say, oh, we're not. These terms don't exist anymore. They do. So I think that also we should not let these kind of policies or changes let us believe that, oh, it's not existing anymore, because this is also another form of trap that probably it's used against minorities. And on the point that Leah mentioned, I fully praise that like meritocracy reference, because I think that's exactly what D&I means. But also on the other hand, I also want for others to see that maybe I need a different treatment because I have been systematically uh, discriminated for generations. So I was, as a gay person, I was not able to go to certain schools. I was not able to gain the wealth that you have been gaining for centuries. So yes, I need to have maybe a head start in some areas so that we can cover up what have been done wrongly for decades and centuries.
Well, actually, Mertcan, will you take us into the next question? So, we talked a lot when we were, chatting about this session ahead of time, about building genuine inclusion. And I think that's you're alluding to that already. The idea that this isn't a program or inclusion isn't a corporate policy, right? Inclusion is a set of behaviors. It is a necessary part of society, and to give it just a really a simple like, hey, this is we're inclusive, like that doesn't really work, right? So, what are sort of methodologies or approaches to building real effective and genuine inclusion in companies, particularly thinking about the fact that we are distributed companies for the most part these days?
So I have been trying to build programs for DNI for the last 10 years, and it has been a lot of fun and a lot of joyful work. Maybe two things that I can mention. Number one is I always try to change the system, but not the people. I have been working a lot with like changing people's attitudes, but it's very exhausting job. It's very costly. So instead of trying to change individuals, I'd rather focus on the system, because the problem is at the system level. Because if you really let it to individuals, the bias is going to come in and the bias is going to perform, because bias loves to do that. But once you actually work on the system change and create processes, systems, and structures that actually provide equity, you make a better inclusive programs and launch that. And then the other thing is, I think we have been also, I heard this from a lot of employees and saying that what is, for example, Blinkist is doing, like Blinkist needs to do this, Blinkist needs to do that. And I do agree with that. We, like, employers have a responsibility and they have to take the responsibility, but Blinkist alone is not going to change the system and the societal discrimination, or each of your companies are not going to be able to do that. We need also individual commitment. What are you doing today? If you know that one of your relatives is voting for a right wing, I don't know, like a party that is actively discriminating towards certain groups, did you talk with them? Did you try to change their minds? What are the individual responsibilities that you're taking to make this change in the society? Because societal change takes a lot of time, but we cannot just only expect employers to take action on providing these training or like providing these like process. We all have to understand that we have individual responsibilities in the societies that we exist.
I'd love to just respond to that because I totally agree that it's got to be systemic. It can't just be the individual, but the individual does still matter. And I think that's a great point. Something I like to talk about is that, a lot of times folks talk about DEI from a corporate perspective being something that's owned by the human resources team, by the people team. It's not. It's really from everyone. I really personally do not love the term people and culture as a way to describe the HR team because culture doesn't belong to HR only. It belongs to everyone. And if it's not coming from the top down, it's really not going to integrate in the whole company. So if you have an HR team who's like, great, we're going to do diverse hiring, we're going to have a focus on bringing in really, really diverse panels of potential candidates for our jobs. But then you have C-level people and hiring managers saying, well, I'm just going to hire everyone I know from my network, people who I've worked with before and who look like me. That's only goes so far. So you have to have it really at every level. It doesn't just belong to HR. There's diverse recruiting and candidate panels. There's reducing bias within giving feedback. There's equitable opportunities for promotion and growth. One team and one person doesn't own all of that. It really has to be the entire company. It has to be integrated with all of business operations and not just one team.
And I think that's sort of the key to how DEI will evolve, is that it will, the hope, the, utopian future is that it's no longer just a separate standalone role. It is actually ingrained and embedded in the way in which a company decides to do business, whatever business that looks like. But we have to start having conversations. And one of the most effective, but the most difficult, is to have difficult conversations. How often are we as leaders, or even as employees, sort of told to sort of not rock the boat or not express opinions that might not be, the norm or the general consensus. Once we start to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable, I think those conversations will allow us to see that saying, I don't know, or saying, I don't know and I'm going to look into this, saying that there is a way we can make this better without fear of reprisal or without being, seen as that one lone voice. I think that will definitely embed DEI, and that will be how the future of DEI continues to evolve.
I would agree to everything that's been said, starting from individual responsibility to the state of DEI, where we would like to be the utopian state. So my organization and my role spans over 4 countries, and we have distributed teams, and there is a lot of complexity that you deal with distributed teams, which is that there's of course the geographical difference, there is the cultural difference, and then there is the administrative difference. So all of that is there. And then building inclusion with remote teams and people who are working hybrid, probably not coming together in the same space, except coming together virtually very, very often. I'll give a couple of examples of a couple of things that we did in our organization. Firstly, we recognized that the first thing that we recognized was that inclusion is everyone's responsibility. It's just not about the workplace, it's wherever you are. The community that you live in, the example of the family member having spoken to them, the schools your children go to, everywhere. It's basically ensuring that in your sphere of influence, what are you doing to ensure that we are building inclusive and equitable spaces? So we recognize that it is everyone's responsibility, and we simply said it. We said it as simply as this, which is inclusion begins with I. So let's begin with I. And what we also realized is that people have a good intent. They have a good heart. They want to be inclusive, but at times they just don't know that they are excluding others. Also, at times they are unsure. If I'm going to say this, am I being inclusive? If I'm going to do this, am I excluding someone? So there is a huge, huge element of awareness and education that comes over here. Basically, making sure that everyone, what we did is we made sure that everyone understands what real inclusion means and what it does not mean, and then giving people the space to talk about inclusion, to be able to build the psychological safety. Let's talk about everything openly, and giving them the confidence to go out and be inclusive. And we found this had a massive impact in our organization. Not only were people feeling more comfortable and they were feeling more confident, we saw a sudden increase in participation levels. People were feeling more okay to speak their opinions, to put forward their perspectives. And that is a sign of, inclusion building in an organization when participation increases. So I would say education here has a massive role to play, which is making people aware what you're doing is inclusive or it is not inclusive. The other I think we've touched upon briefly is about accountability. It's individual accountability, but within the organization, it's accountability at all levels. Lia, you're right. I mean, HR is not people and culture. Culture is everyone, and everyone contributes to the culture. And also leaders across all levels contribute to how we progress inclusion. If they are not being inclusive, whether it's in their actions, whether how decisions are being taken, how hiring is being done, or how team meetings are being run, then it's not going to work. You cannot just put a bolt on DEI saying, okay, here's a bolt on DEI, and now we're going to run this parallelly to everything that's happening. So yeah, I mean, those were two things that we have actively invested in, whether it is education for everyone and whether it is accountability across levels. And that's like really, really working for us.
And I think, Yasmeen, you make a great point that really struck with me is you're not just telling people be inclusive. You have to give people tangible things that they can do. What does inclusivity look like, sound like, feel like? And what behaviors will you accomplish in your accountability? If we're talking about putting these accountabilities into people's performance plans or what have you, if inclusion is one of those accountabilities, what does that look like for people? Because so many people don't know what tangibly that looks like. We're just constantly telling people your team has to be diverse. You must be inclusive. Oh, and also sprinkle in some equity if you can, but we don't tell them what that means. We don't tell them that diverse means when you're doing interviews, is your panel diverse? Are you ensuring that you have diverse candidates? Do you have that data to support that? Are we telling them that inclusion means holding meetings at the appropriate times? If somebody has childcare needs, we're not booking a 7 a.m. meeting if folks have to take their children into daycare. We all of these different things that we aren't telling them how to do is where that fear of, I don't know if I'm doing this right or wrong comes from. And so I think you make some really great points. So thanks for bringing that up.
Can I just add one little thing? I can't. I mean, I fully agree with everything that has been said. But while doing these, we also have to, I think, open a parenthesis and said, especially if you're a part of the majority group where you have privileges, also know that don't always expect me to tell you what does this mean? Like you need to own up to your privileges and do the work yourself because I'm tired of hand-holding and teaching you what you need to do. Like I have my own job, I have to do my own things, and plus I'm doing unpaid work that I have to now teach you what is inclusion, what is like I know maybe as HR and people teams we have to do it, but oh, my nose is bleeding. But people also need to take their ownership. I'm gonna quickly go and get a
All right. Hope you're all right. I think the Lena, one thing that you brought up, and Yasmin, really, you alluded to this too, is there's a real training aspect, and I like the awareness piece that you brought up, Lena, around like meetings and panels and things like that. That's free, but there's a if you're talking about hosting conversations, hosting challenging, difficult conversations, there is probably somebody that you're bringing in from outside of the organization to host that type of training, right? I wouldn't expect someone internally to be a pro in that. So, how do you get budget? How do you use metrics and or whatever it is to drive like a really clear business need for the organization to say, yes, I'm going to spend money on training for this, which is a key part of the equity inclusion piece.
Um, so Adam, if equity, inclusion, and diversity is important to an organization, we must put money behind it. It's as simple as that. Anything that's important for the working of an organization, the organization will put money behind it. And if we are not putting money behind it, we are clearly saying, well, it's a good thing to do, but it is not critical to us. So that's the first thing. The second is we have to have metrics in place. Now, whether they can be quantitative metrics, they can be qualitative metrics. There's a range of metrics that one can track depending upon what metric is important to your organization. In my organization, we track diversity data very, very closely. Good thing to do. But more than that, we track inclusion. So we measure inclusion, and we measure how inclusion is improving within the organization. We have multiple, if I could say, programs or efforts in place, whether it is around inclusive hiring, it is around retention. We have all of those in place. But are they just standalone programs, or they are programs that are resulting in a change, whether it's the organization diversity or a change in how people are feeling? I would always put measuring inclusion above measuring diversity metrics. If people are feeling safe, if there is psychological safety, if they feel they belong to the organization, if they feel that they are able to voice their opinions without any fear, then diversity will follow. So for us, putting budgets behind DEI has been an outcome of the metrics that we have put in place. And the metrics are both diversity metrics, where we are looking at diversity across levels. We are looking at diversity in attraction, promotion, retention, and also the inclusion metrics. How are we doing as an organization as far as inclusion is concerned? And I'm so happy to report that it's an upward curve that we have as of now.
I love that you separated out the idea of measuring diversity versus measuring inclusion, because I think a lot of times people just say DEI, and it just feels like it's one thing. It's not. It's a lot of things. It's diversity, it's equity, it's inclusion. Lena, you brought this up too. It's like those are not all, one action doesn't necessarily cover all of those. And to me, the idea of measuring both, like one's a leading indicator, one's a lagging, right? One's more proactive, one's more reactive. I think about, in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, when so many companies just put up these statements And it was very nice to have words on a website that said, hey, we're inclusive. But like you said earlier, Yasmeen, it's like, where's the action behind that? Is it just the words of, yes, sure, we're inclusive, we believe in diversity. Okay, well, what actions are you actually taking? And so many companies just kind of stopped at the language. They just said, okay, yep, we've branded ourselves an inclusive company, and that is all we're going to do. And that's just barely step one.
And so for those companies that had budget in that time and sort of have pulled back, that's a tough conversation to have. But every company has data. There is data everywhere. You just got to go out and look for it. We're so concerned oftentimes about like, what data should I have? Start with the data that you have. That is ultimately how, one of the organizations I work with, that they sort of started to funnel more money back into DEI, more money back into employee resource groups. That was really important for them. And that was inherently linked to the stories that the employees could tell about how what they do within the DEI space links back to the business. So finding that integrated storytelling opportunity, we had an ERG that was really closely working with a community organization that impacted a marginalized community. And it was through the, 3 years of hard work, over $75,000 raised for two local charities, that they actually were able to convince the organization to invest even more in them over the years. So it's really important that we start to take a look at what data do we already have. And to Yasmeen's point, it's not just numbers data, it could be data that is qualitative as well. But Adam, it has been probably really difficult for those people who have pulled away to start to look back, but just look for the data and find out what you can use and what will pull on the heartstrings or the mind strings of the folks who have the money.
Yeah,
Can I
that
add
that's.
something?
Oh, go
I know
ahead, please.
my camera is off because it's a bloodshed here. I just wanted to add one thing. I think one of the data that I find it very crucial is the cost of D&I, because I think the business loves money, and you need to prove what is this actually costing you. One of the things that I've done is we calculated the cost on how much we, let's say, waste time on discussing about D&I but not taking any action. And we found that we, on a yearly basis, we're spending 20K for an organization that was like 100 people on just time spent on D&I related matters. Another cost is look at your exit survey and exit data and really identify how many people actually leave your company because of D&I, and then really calculate, okay, what is the cost of rehiring, revamping these people, and these are very important data to say when you pitch for a D&I project. Say, I can save you 150K, and this is my plan. If you actually put a number, and I know this is like playing the devil's game, but that's the hard truth. Businesses love to see money, and they want to make money. So you have to sometimes speak the language of what matters, and that's money.
And to that point, somebody asked, have you sort of changed the wording around DEI to make it more palatable? The reality is the work continues, whether it's called DEI or whether it's called QFP or whether it's called whatever acronym you want to place on it. It's still, the work is still going. There are still folks within organizations who, regardless of whether they have the title of a DEI consultant or what have you, are still working on these activities. If renaming it is what needs to get done to get the work done, then sometimes that's what needs to be done, but the work is still the work. And so to Mertcan's point, it is sometimes speaking the language of the organization that will ultimately result in more work getting done. And that's the goal.
All right, we are very unfortunately very nearly out of time. For folks in the audience, do you have any questions that the panelists can answer in our last couple of minutes, or that they can follow up on after the fact? Please feel free to put them in chat, if so. And I think that last bit of the conversation around using metrics to drive decisions or to drive focus is really critical, because I think there's once your organization says yes, this is important, then you're like, okay, put your money where your mouth is. But one of the things that we've seen is a lot of organizations saying fewer and fewer people related, human related programs are important. We'll have execs saying, oh, we're in survival mode. We don't have budget or time to do anything but focus on sales or but focus on marketing or but focus on whatever. And so, how do we get those business leaders to realize that this is part of the same outcome? This is part of the same effort. That is, I think that's where like bringing in that data around I think in CS terms churn, but that's not what attrition, right? And that sort of conversation can be really effective. Folks from the audience, any questions for the panel before we sign off? Panelists, any last minute words of wisdom, pieces of advice, favorite tactics that worked recently before we wrap?
I do want to say, Mertcan, you sort of mentioned something earlier that I really want folks to focus in on. You're not here to change everyone's opinion, sorry. Find the folks who are going to be your allies, who are going to be your champions in the places you least expect them, and utilize them. Ask them to be advocates. They do exist. They are willing to help. They just don't know sometimes that you exist or what your goals are. But I call them the hidden champions within the organizations I work with. It is absolutely imperative that you seek out opportunities to network, because you'll find them everywhere. They're just not ready because they're afraid. And yes, I don't want to handhold. As a woman of color myself, it can get emotionally exhaustive. But when I focus on the work and understanding that I don't know what I don't know, sometimes helping other people understand what they don't know will open up an avenue for advocacy that you really hadn't expected before. So find your hidden champions.
My two biggest things to keep in mind when building this in terms of like thinking about approaches are transparency and clarity. A lot of times, departments will make these programmatic changes. They'll go beyond just the words on a website. They'll take these actions. They'll really think about this. They'll put work into it, but no one knows it's happening. And that transparency is really, really important to share. Hey, we're really dedicated to this. Here's what we're doing. Here's our action plan. We heard from our last engagement survey that people aren't feeling like there's safety or belonging here. Here's what we're doing to address that. That goes such a long way, because the more you talk about it openly and you share vulnerably, you'll get more people to speak up and say, hey, I appreciate you're doing this. Here's what I can do to help. Here's how I'd like to be involved. Here's something I would like to see. So the more open you are, the more feedback you'll get, the more data you'll get, and you'll be able to take more action and make more of an impact.
Lia, echoing what you're saying, which is about openness and transparency, I think any amount of communication around what are the efforts around DEI that the organization is making is less. You can't over communicate over here. So the more you tell everyone, whether it's your employees or your external stakeholders, how the organization is progressing or how the organization is articulating its DEI efforts, the more support, the more champions we're going to get. So communication, absolutely key. The other bit is around, it's often said have exec sponsors for DEI, have leaders backing DEI. I think we need to go a step further than that. If inclusion is important, then it has to be reflected in the organization strategy. And going back to what Merchant said, there is a business case which needs to be built for it. Why are we doing it? So it has to be built in over there. It can't be a separate effort. For a long time, organizations have done it like a bolt-on. Okay, here's everything that we are doing, and plus this is on the side. No, that doesn't work. This is not a side thing. This is centric, absolutely centric and core to the organization working, and it needs to be seen there. It needs to be placed over there. So I would say those would be my two bits.
I also have one bit. First of all, I'm so sorry that this is right now happening, but both of my noses are now bleeding. The only thing that I'm gonna say is you have to change yourself. So go to ChatGPT today and type, "Hey, I want to be a better ally. I want to be better at how I support the system and minorities and all of these things." Type it and create yourself a 2 weeks long educational program. Go through all these materials. You have to do the learning yourself and don't
Mm.
expect others to hold your hands, as Lena mentioned. And that's it. I'm so sorry I'm out.
Hope you're all right. Hope you're back to not bleeding soon. Well, thank you, everybody. Really, really appreciate the time. Attendees, audience, thank you for joining in on this really critical conversation, and thanks for the advice and the tips and the tricks and the guidance from the panelists. Really, really appreciate it. Have a really fantastic rest of the day and rest of the Panda Horizons, everyone. Bye, y'all.